Okay, buonasera a tutti. Good evening, y'all. Thanks for joining tonight. I apologize for the long wait. I also want to just apologize to anybody who was trying to comment before if it didn't go through. Should be all set now. Thank y'all for those who have kind of stuck around a little bit as I navigated that. Turned out my excuse me camera was having a little issue, but I got that taken care of. I'm sure my grandfather, who worked for AT&T for some odd years, would have been very disappointed at how long it took me to fix that. But we're all good now, and I'm looking forward to getting in with you tonight. There's a lot of topics to cover. There's a lot to discuss across major sports, as always, NFL, MLB, NBA. It's all over the place. We found out a couple of hours ago about a major deal that went down in the NFL. So, of course, that, as always, reconstructed the agenda that I had written so nicely as recently as about 12 hours ago. But that's the fun of sports, right? We kind of we don't follow it. It almost kind of follows us in a sense, in terms of if you're kind of bored with where things are at, wait 5 minutes because something's going to come out. But I'm excited to get into it with y'all. And if you guys have anything you want to ask, anything you want to share, or want to debate a point, anything, just drop it right in that chat or on any platform that you're using. And looking forward to talking to y'all and connecting. So that being said, my first topic tonight, I didn't really want to get into the show, the crux of the content, without first addressing the news that came out of NCAA football this past week, and just expressing for Hugh Freeze, the coach of Auburn football. For those who don't know, he announced that he is fighting prostate cancer. So I just wanted to acknowledge from all accounts, what seems like somebody who has made a solid impact there and other places as well. And obviously he has a family of his own, just expressing prayers for him and hoping that he comes back personally and then professionally stronger than ever coming off of that. We heard that news a couple of days ago, so I wanted to address that beforehand. Secondly, and this is the last thing that I'll say that's kind of pre the content of the show, but I do have to give a special birthday shout out to my friend, and the reason why I am on the show today, Rachel Walters. My friend Rachel first got me connected with K&K Sports back in 2022, and it is her birthday today. So couldn't get through this show without expressing and sharing my happy birthday wishes to her. And thank you again for kind of being the one who made this all possible. You made it possible for me to do the 18 months on the main show that I was on, and you made it possible for that to parlay ultimately into me starting this show, which was born out of years of things that I had been kind of trying to draw up and plan out. So happy birthday, Rach. I hope you're spending your day however you best want it. And pulling off of that, now we get actually into the crux of the sports content. As I alluded to earlier, for those of you who don't know, and even for those of you who do know, I know that Coach Brislin's pretty excited about this. I got a chance to speak to him a little bit after the Washington Commanders deal went down, acquiring Deebo Samuel from the San Francisco 49ers in exchange for a 5th-round draft pick. We knew that Deebo Samuel, well, we've known for a couple of years that the 49ers were likely, if they were going to pay Brock Purdy all the money that we've been hearing that they're going to, which I know that in itself is a debatable topic. I know that because I was just debating somebody about it about half an hour ago. But for a while, we've known that they weren't going to be able to pay everybody on what was a loaded roster. And we're starting to see the effects of that now with guys like Deebo Samuel. He has been moved now to the Washington Commanders. So Jaden Daniels, who that I was waxing poetic about Jaden Daniels much of last year, including when he was with Washington. I didn't suddenly try and pretend he's trash or whatever. I did not fall off that wagon just because he was in the same division as Philadelphia, and he definitely showed a lot last year why a lot of people, myself included, thought he was the number one quarterback prospect in last year's draft, and so now he's got another, as they say, toy to play with. And when you have that as a second-year quarterback, when you already had the success that he did in year one, I think that it is not out of the realm of possibility that they could join the sort of Detroit, Philadelphia S tier of what the NFC is going to this coming season. There's a lot of offseason left, but as of right now, if they snuck in and they became kind of that other team in that top tier, would not surprise me in the slightest. So the after effects for both of these, obviously the main question that everybody's asking now with San Francisco is, what does this mean for Brock Purdy? And what does this mean for how much they expect to pay him? And are there other players that they're not going to be able to pay also? Or at least that they're going to make the decision to move off of. Deebo kind of was the obvious one, but I heard questions earlier now about Brandon Ayuk. I heard questions about, different players around, particularly the offensive side of the roster. In fact, I heard earlier today that part of those discussions included defensive tackle Jonathan Allen in terms of being relevant on the defensive side of things. That would have been kind of a financial hurdle that they would have had to clear. He was due over $16 million this year, so probably for financial sake, made more sense. Evidently made more sense for them to keep him out of the deal. But in terms of just the 49ers from a cap standpoint, and depending on who you believe about what Brock Purdy is going to get or what he's going to command, my understanding is that he's expected to command 50 to 60 million, if not more, annually, which I do not understand why they would pay that. That is rivaling Dak and Daniel Jones' contract insanity to me, and may beat it out. The only reason why I'm not going to say it beats it out is because, unlike those other two quarterbacks, he's actually at least been to Super Bowl. But absolutely just does not make a ton of sense to me why they would go to that level with him. But excuse me. But you start to look at the cap. You start to look at guys that could either be cut or be traded, and there's not really a ton of obvious places where the amount of money that they'd save is worth the dead money that they would incur. You start looking at guys like Kyle Juszczyk, who is about $2.9 million if they cut him before June 1st, and would be about $3.6 million in dead money. That might be someone who they think makes sense, especially as a fullback. They've got Colton McKivitz, who's a little bit less on both sides, a little bit less dead money, and also a little bit less in what he would save in the cap. But any of these big names, whether or not you'd want to move them, any of these big names, Fred Warner and George Kittle, both would be over $20 million in dead money. Warner would only warrant a cap savings of a little over $300K, and Kittle would just be a little over $1.3 million. And then the next four guys that they're paying in terms of their cap number, Williams, Bosa, well, I guess three now because one of them was Samuel, but Williams, Bosa, and Ayuk, they would lose cap based on how much dead money they would incur. So all that is to say, I don't really know where, if they really are gung-ho about doing all this, about kind of switching up the amount of money, I'm going to guess that they're going to designate this as a post-June 1 trade, which will allow Ayuk to which will allow them to incur a $4.6 million dead money, but it'll save them 6.1 against the cap. So, excuse me. So my guess is that some of this is going to be post June 1 designated. I'm guessing that the trade will be, and some of these other cuts will be as well. But even when you look at the cuts, I mean, I was talking about numbers earlier about pre-June 1, but even if they do this as a post-June 1 cuts, kind of flanking this Ayuk deal, you're not really looking at anybody who individually is going to save them more than about $7 million. And if you're trying to fund a $60+ million deal for your quarterback, I'm going to guess that you'd have to do at least a couple of those. I'm going to guess that they're not going to suddenly say, oh, we've moved off. In fact, Deebo Samuel, of all the guys, even if they do this as a June 1, other than Trent Williams, he was the one who they would save the least by moving off of and trading post June 1. So not a lot of that makes sense to me. I don't really quite understand. I understand why the 49ers want to keep Brock Purdy, and I understand to some extent why the number has gotten somewhat high. But to me, I think it's just more a scathing indictment and a microcosmic example of how absolutely ballistic and just anywhere between inane and almost disturbing how the market has inflated in quarterbackville in the NFL, because you've got guys now where an average starter, like just as an example, I'm a huge Baker Mayfield fan. He had a period of time going into free agency where he'd been pretty much an average quarterback, and he got, I think it was like $30 million a year or something. And Sam Darnold, he had one good year and came apart, like the wheels fell off, the transmission fell out, and the fuel injector is somewhere over on I-55. And all of that is to say that, and there are some people who still believe he should be paid like the quarterback he was from week 1 to around week 16. After completely choosing not to acknowledge the elephant in the room, which is of the past 5 years, where he was anywhere between a dreadful player or not even player at all because he was not playing on the field. So I'm struggling to really see how San Francisco is going to maneuver this. This kind of almost reminds me a little bit of the New Orleans Saints. They're kind of notorious with, Jeff Ireland and all of them. They have become a little bit sort of notorious for the way that they kick the can down the road so much. My guess is that there will probably be a couple of restructures or extensions as well. But again, if it's not Fred Warner, these restructures are, you're looking at 80,000, 160,000, 700,000, depending on the player. Leonard Floyd is the one that's going to give you about 5 million, unless it's Warner or Kittle would be not quite as good, but he'd be higher than Leonard Floyd. But again, unless you're doing this with several players, this has just got to be the first drop in the bucket. If you're going to fund that 60 million of to one player, and we've seen what a disaster that becomes when you do it before you've even won a title. It's one thing to do it after you've won a title, but it's a major risk to do it. And I say that as somebody who Philadelphia gave the bag to their quarterback before they won the title. Obviously, I'm very aware of that. But when you're looking to pay your quarterback that kind of money, which is way more than Jalen Hurts had, then I'm struggling to see where you're getting the coins out of your couch cushions for that. But anyway, that's kind of my take on it from the San Francisco side of things. And prior, I had talked about on the Washington Commander side of things about how I think that he is just an absolute great fit for, to pair with a second year Jaden Daniels. And I also think that there's a strong, I think that it makes sense why there was no inclusion of Jonathan Allen here, even though it apparently was very possible, because I don't think that he, I think with the financial worth that already San Francisco is going to have to do, I don't think that he would have. I think he would have added issues to clear and hurdles to clear is what I'm trying to say. That's pretty much all I have to say there. And excuse me, pulling off of that, I think I'm going to jump in a second here because there was some baseball stuff that transpired this week and throughout the week. But excuse me, pardon. One of the things that I'm going to start with is, stop me if you've heard this one before, the Yankees getting bitten by the injury bug. We just had DJ LeMahieu leave today with a calf issue. Giancarlo Stanton is expected to start the year on the IL with bilateral soreness in his upper body, and he's also been mysteriously absent from camp from what we're just hearing is a personal issue. And I want to be respectful when I say that, just because it's clearly a very private matter. If it's been this tight-lipped, he's not spoken about it. Aaron Boone hasn't spoken about it, which I would make sense. If it's a personal matter, I would hope that nobody would speak out about it before he did. So I hope everything's, obviously all of Yankees universe hopes everything's okay with him and his family. But that's another guy that they're not expecting to have. They just had Luis Gil, who was believed to play a significant role in this coming, in the pitching this coming season. He's going to undergo an MRI for shoulder injury, which is happening sometime today. May have already happened by now. But so already you see three key guys in whom they were placing a lot of hope and trust this coming year, who are now not going to be somebody you can count on opening day, or at least are people you don't know if you're going to be able to count on. And then Clark Schmidt has been dealing with the back issue. JT Brubaker had 3 fractured ribs that happened last week, trying to elude a comebacker in his first game of spring training. We know the ups and downs that we've been having with Scott Efros, who has now strained his left hamstring, and you can keep going on. I mean, we know that Hampton had Tommy John. Like I could keep going on. Just the way that the injury bug, and I don't know how much attention this has gotten, but these are legitimate blows that are being dealt already to what New York was building up. I think New York was kind of in that sort of almost cliche and almost overplayed space of as long as everybody stays healthy, which evidently right now is not the case. I hope Aaron Judge doesn't sustain a herniated disc from carrying this whole offense on his back, but and there was that report, which I heard somebody else say later on. There was that report that several months ago they were prepared to cut ties with DJ LeMahieu, and then there were players in the clubhouse who intervened, and for whatever they said, it caused the front office to reconsider and to not make that move. But there's just too much uncertainty now, and especially on the pitching side, when you have issues with, you had Hampton have Tommy John, you have Heel, you have Clark Schmidt, then you got the Brubaker injury, then you got Efros. I'm in a position now where I don't know if it makes as much sense to trade Marcus Stroman as I once thought it did. Because when you were looking at him as a number 6 or number 7 starter making $18 million or whatever it is, I'm no longer sure. But because for a 6 or 7 starter, that is obviously an inflated amount of money that would very much be better off allocated to other areas. Even if they had to pay down some of the salary, at least some of the money would have gotten off the books. But with all of this now, I'm kind of just wondering, do they just at least start the season with him? And then if things go well around him, maybe look to try and flip him at the deadline. I don't really know what the answer is with him, but with the injuries I'm seeing and if it's not an outright injury, at least the uncertainty with other guys that I'm seeing, I'm not sure that I'm pushing for a Stroman trade as hard as I once was. But excuse me. We've got some messages coming in. Jody Moncrief says, Deebo to Washington for a 5th. That's highway robbery by Washington. I would agree with that very much. Again, like I said, I think we were hearing that a Deebo trade was probably not going to return as much as people would have expected, but I still don't think that people would have thought one middle of day 3 pick would be the return. I thought we would at least get maybe a 3 and a 6, or maybe one of those where it's a 3 and the other pick is a 4 that can become a 3 if X, Y, and Z are met, or something of that nature, or a pick and then a pick swap later on or something like that. I thought it would at least be something with one of those conditionals. I did not expect it to be one middle of day 3 pick for Deebo. And what that suggests to me is that San Francisco just wanted to get this done because they have other things they want to do. And this was the best offer they had right now. And they jumped on it because it was, again, better than anything else they were believing that they were going to get in the near future. And they wanted to move on to other business. That is the only reason why I can understand why they would take that little, because I really believe that had they waited, I mean, we just saw what happened with, I know it's a different position, but we just saw what happened with Matt Stafford going back to LA. Now the Giants are shaking in their boots a little bit. You've got other teams, the Raiders, shaking in their boots a little bit in terms of what guys who we really thought were going after Stafford as sort of a safe safe zone, I guess, compared to some of the very much uncertain futures of what these guys are going to do in the draft. So, excuse me, I do wonder now if, what they thought about the receiver market, both free agent and trade. I don't know if maybe they thought that they can bring in a cost-effective replacement there. I don't know if they thought that with the guys that are going to be available versus aren't going to be available, if they thought that by waiting they would actually even lose more leverage, which it doesn't seem like they had a ton based on what we were just seeing right here. But either way, I agree with Jody in many respects. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Brandon Howlam is saying Texans. Welcome to have you on, Brandon. I appreciate you jumping in on YouTube. And Carson Shear says he's got his little turquoise thing that for some reason never shows up. But Carson, hope you're doing well, buddy. And a very strong congratulations to you. Your Pistons have wildly been turning it around recently. I don't know what they're excuse me, the coaching staff and the front office is putting in their Gatorade, but whatever it is, it's going quite well for y'all, and I hope that maintains. I'm very excited for y'all, and of course excited for my boy Isaiah Stewart as well. Pardon me. And then, but yeah, as far as the trade, that's really all I can say at this point. Insofar as the near term, both financially and on the field. But yeah, and then I'll touch on this for a second. I don't want to get too deep into it for myriad reasons that'll become obvious once I talk about it a little bit. But there was a development that came out earlier today where the president of the United States basically stated that he was going to move forward about issuing, pardoning the situation around Pete Rose posthumously. And then subsequently, the commissioner, Rob Manfred, came out and said that he is now looking into potentially, quote unquote, reinstating Pete Rose, which would, again, make him eligible for Hall of Fame induction and all the rest. So there's obviously a lot of people who are excited about this. There's a lot of people who are excited, but they wish it happened during his lifetime, like while he was, able to appreciate it. And then there's some people who are just completely against the whole thing. So, I think it's what stuck out from him, and this was brought up in one of the messages. I think was the message that the president posted. But what was posted, an acknowledgement of what he did wrong, but also showing how it kind of differentiates. It kind of is a little bit of like a Tucupita Marcano, who got banned for this about a year ago, but in that he was only found to have bet in favor of his own teams. I think if he had bet for whatever reason against his own teams, a la, a little bit closer to the Black Sox scandal than it would have been at that point to the Marcano situation. And I think that, this is a reasonable discussion to have, at least in terms of for the Hall of Fame and such. The one thing I will say that I sort of disagree with in this space, when people start to have this conversation outside of baseball, like as fans or as media or what have you, I hear people say, they're advertising FanDuel, they're advertising DraftKings, they're advertising all this stuff, but players are not allowed to do it. Yeah, they're advocating for this stuff for the fans. This is fan, this is content that's going out for the fans, and it's revenue that they're getting on the back end. They're not advocating for the players to go and partake in this stuff. And I mean, we all know, whatever job you've had, whether you're a player, whether you're, in blue collar retail, whatever it is, there are certain things that other people can do that you have made a commitment not to do, and you've made a commitment to abide by that for as long as you're employed by them. And that is part of, and I don't, to my knowledge, baseball doesn't say you can't bet on other sports, just not on baseball. So this whole but this whole sort of theatrical sort of grandstand, I guess, about this should be completely legal because the players should get to benefit from this if the league is advertising it. I think that's a little bit misguided, and I think that's a little bit improperly founded, I guess, because I don't really think that it captures the reality of the fact that it is no different from any other profession. There are some professions where they expect you to dress a certain way, some professions where they expect you to, abstain from some habits or whatever the case may be. But there are a lot of different areas where, in order to get the benefits that you get and to get paid the wage that you're paid, you're expected to adhere to certain customs or standards or whatever, whether or not you personally agree with them. And that's just how it goes. So I kind of feel like that's a little bit more of where the gambling thing is for me in baseball, especially if it's not talking about, or especially if you're talking about these types of things where you can bet on other sports. Baseball kind of has a weird timeline because you kind of have these beginning of NBA, NFL, and NHL seasons kind of all lining up right with each other. And then baseball is kind of the only sport that just begins in April, May. That's kind of when a lot of the other sports are sort of winding down. So from time of year, it kind of stands out a little bit. But, if the league is not going to turn around and say, we're going to treat baseball, football, basketball, hockey, soccer, cricket, I don't know. My guess is that they're probably betting on cornhole at this point by now. But I'm actually curious to hear what the one of the co-hosts of Wits and Wagers has going on, and somebody who also appears on Ticket Time and the show that with Joey Clams that he's done, Clams and Claws. So Carson, if you're still out there, I'd love to hear your opinion on what I'm saying. But but that's kind of all I want to say there, because I think it'd be great to see him get a little bit more of what he deserves on the production side of things, because obviously he not only got the record legitimately, but unlike other numbers where you can say the 762 home runs for Barry Bonds is tainted, or the 696 home runs for Alex Rodriguez is tainted, unlike situations where you say those two things because you don't know if they would have legitimately been the same number, he didn't have a sort of, unless you believe that he played harder in the games that you're bet, which I have no idea, that's beyond inquantifiable. But unless you believe that, and which is something that is very subjective and beyond the scope of what empirical data can ever be sufficient in an argument, I don't think that I'd be comfortable with looking at it as a situation where it's kind of leading as a way to, gives way to the argument of, okay, now this happens, so now we're going to be more relaxed and more sort of hands-off-ish when it comes to the issue of players betting on games that they're playing in, even if it's for your team. So I don't know. I just see that differently than I think the quote-unquote majority does. But again, just my opinion. Another thing that was fascinating, and I'm going to kick back to the NFL on this. The NFL Players Association does, well, actually, more and more leagues are doing this, and I find it kind of cool. But to my understanding, they don't do it quite exactly the same way. The NFL does these report cards, and technically it's the Players Association that does it annually, and they grade different teams on myriad different things. They grade them on treatment of families. They grade them on their food and dining area, on their nutritionist and dietitian, on their locker room, their training staff, their weight room, their strength coaches, their team travel, their head coach, and their ownership. So all those things, they get anywhere between an A and an F. In fact, except there are a couple of places in here. I want to find them specifically, but there are a couple of places on here where they didn't just get Fs, they got F minuses. So the Buffalo Bills with team travel got F minus. The excuse me. I'm looking for the other ones because there was, I think, 4 of them. The Cincinnati Bengals treatment of families got an F minus. I got to look more into that. The Arizona Cardinals locker room got an F minus. That didn't surprise me at all because overall, they also gave an overall at the end of this once all the grades were tallied. and the Cardinals, I'm going to double check, but I believe the Cardinals got dead last overall, 32nd out of 32, excuse me. But F- for their locker room. So it was quite fascinating. And the numbers were also weighted a little bit. There was a weighted scale, like things like food and cafeteria, locker room, training staff. Those things were weighted higher than something like nutritionist / dietitian. But the top two, unsurprisingly, were 15% weighted for the club owner and 10% weighted for the head coach. So it's no surprising that the two guys at the top of the food chain in different organizations had the most sway in terms of how the ultimate grades went down. But I started to look a little bit at that in particular, which was the ranking of all the teams as a whole, like holistically overall. And what fascinated me was I wasn't really shocked by too many of the teams that were toward the bottom. The Jets being 29th, the Cardinals, like I said earlier, were 32nd, dead last. There were a couple of other teams, excuse me, as well, that didn't really surprise me. In fact, one of the teams that kind of surprised me a little bit, Cleveland being another one on the bottom. One of the teams that did surprise me a little bit in terms of how highly they were ranked, or I guess rated in pretty much across the board, was the Atlanta Falcons. Overall, they were ranked third out of the 32 teams, and they got high marks in particular for the treatment of families, food and dining area, nutritionist, dietitian. But they didn't get any of these areas. They didn't get below a B, and they got an A overall. Or I'm sorry, they got third overall is what I meant. So, and that also helps that they've got A+ in ownership and head coach. So evidently players think very highly of Raheem Morris and of ownership as well, which is optimistic for Atlanta Falcons fans who hope at some point soon they can capture that elusive first ring. But I don't know, it's kind of a fun thing to go through. I encourage you, and it's publicly available. It's not like I have my hands on something that nobody does. So I encourage you on your own time to go and kind of look through on your favorite team, the NFLPA.com report cards 2025. But there's a lot of interesting and fun things on here. They've got, they don't have at least that I've found, they don't have a neatened list first through 32nd, which I think for the eye would have been kind of nice to be more aesthetically pleasing and to be just a little bit more easier to digest, I think, because you've got all these grades for 32 teams across, what is this, 12 different, 32 teams across 12 different categories. So that would be 384, I think, in terms of how many different individual grades there are to look through. But I don't know. I enjoy that the league does this. I enjoy the Players Association led by J.C. Treader does this. And I think that it's kind of interesting to also go through not just the letters themselves, but there are descriptions behind the numbers. Or letters. I just couldn't go through every single one. Otherwise, the show would still be going on when the season started. So, but I do encourage y'all to go check out that as well. Excuse me. While we're talking about Players Associations, I'm going to shift back to Major League Baseball because we heard a little bit from one of the executives over at the MLB Players Association, Tony Clark, who spoke about the fact that he expects that there's going to be a work stoppage and a lockout again when the next CBA expires, which obviously anybody who has gone through any of these work stoppages or lockouts or whatever end up phrasing they be for reasons why the games are not being played. I think it's obviously you're going to get people who are kind of antsy about it, and are going to say, well, the players are being greedy or whatever, and you're going to have people who say, well, for Major League Baseball doing so well, the players deserve a bigger slice of the action. And I think there's some legitimacy, as usual. I think there's some legitimacy to both ends of the argument on that. But I just found it odd that he would come out, and maybe he's done this in the past and I just wasn't aware of it, but I just found it odd that he came out and publicly said that he fully expected a lockout when the CBA next expires, which is in 2026. So the end of not this coming season, but the following, because it'd be at the end of the 2026 season. So yeah, but so I kind of was surprised by that, and I was even more surprised by. I got to tell you, Rob Manfred is one interesting cat, because he more or less said that lockouts could be potentially a positive thing. Not only that there could be a silver lining, but that they can outly be considered a positive thing, which I don't really understand. I think some of his logic might be, justifiable it kind of reminds me of the Anthony Rendon comments. If you remember that a few months ago, where he made comments about how baseball wasn't the most important thing to him, when I think that was well intended, as he was talking about things like faith and family, but I think it just came off tonally like off note and missing the mark with him. And I think that it was similar with Rob Manfred saying that the lockout was, quote, actually a positive. I think that he was trying to, talk about leverage and talk about ways that it can move the game along and kind of progress the game to a better place, and sort of pinch both sides into trying to make a deal. But again, when you just came down with the way that the lockout went in 2021, I think maybe it was even 2020, I don't know. No, 2019, I think. Anyway, I'm losing track of when the last one was. But whatever the case may be, I think when you had that whole crazy thing going on, you had what was going on during the COVIDism years, I just don't know if that quote is what I would want following me around for the next 18 months before the, perceivably the next potential lockout, or a little over 18 months would look like. So I don't know, but as anybody who's been watching this show for a particularly long amount of time, I have had a lot of questions about the way that Rob Manfred has approached certain things and spoken about certain things. But the game appears to be improving I shouldn't say improving, expanding and growing its reach under Manfred's watchful eye, as they say. So there ostensibly are things that I'm missing that people are picking up that I'm not understanding. My buddy Trevor jumps in and says, "What's up, Swifty Scoopies?" Okay, we made it shorter, but we added a phoneme at the end, so that's fun. MLB needs a salary cap system. I doubt the players want that. I think a lockout is coming baseball down the road. Yeah, Trevor, I was just talking about that. In fact, it was a couple days ago. I don't know if you saw, but as I was mentioning a little while ago, the Players Association leader basically publicly came out and said that he expects there to be a lockout after the CBA expires, which is in December of 2026. And then Rob Manfred did an equally or perhaps even more bizarre thing by coming out and basically saying he thinks that lockouts can be a positive. I think both of those were bizarre statements to make, especially to make publicly, and particularly, even more exponentially when you factor in the way that things went down during COVID era. So I don't know. I wasn't wild about it. Hopefully good things can come out of it if the next one does happen. But I don't know. Just the fact that they were this early are fully expecting that to be the case, and they're trying to spin it as a potential good thing. It's just rubbing me the wrong way. And that's a subjective thing. There might be other people who agree with either Tony Clark or Manfred or a little bit of both. Just found the whole thing bizarre, quite frankly. But that's all I've got to say on that matter. As I mentioned earlier, when my buddy Carson jumped in for a moment, his Detroit Pistons, just wow, is kind of the way that I can encapsulate everything that's been going on, because they were a team that I mean, we know how poorly they played last year. They ended up with 14 wins, coming off of or that making their 5th season in a row not winning more than 23 games. They've already beaten that number by 11 so far this season, and there's still 20 some odd games to be played. They're not particularly high in the division, but as we know, divisions don't mean all that much when it comes to NBA, at least not to the extent that conference rankings do. But holy smokes, does Coach Bickerstaff look like he's got something flowing in the Gatorade with this team that other coaches, whether it was Williams or whomever, have missed on the last couple of years. We've had Jalen Duran. He's attempting less field goals than per game than he was last year, but his percentage of shooting them has never been higher. And he in particular has kind of been the main one to watch. A couple of his numbers are actually down a little bit, but it seems like his game has sort of picked up best where they find him most valuable, and he's kind of leading that resurgence. But you look up and down, the lineup with some of these players, and just the rankings that they have across the league. They're ranked. Pardon me. They're ranked in the top 10 when it comes to both defensive rebounds, offensive rebounds, and thus obviously total rebounds. They're also doing a relatively positive job on the defensive side of things when it comes to keeping the other team, not only keeping the other team from making field goals, but keeping them from even really attempting them. They're ranked 6th in opponent shots per game against you. So again, I could break down numbers all night, but the fact is they're 33-27. They're tied for the 9th most wins in the NBA. And then when it's pardon me, when it comes to the 4 factors, which on defensive side are EFG, which is effective field goal percentage, the turnover, the defensive rebounds, and the opponent free throws for field goal attempt, which is what I was just talking about. In particular, in the turnover battle and the defensive rebound battle, they're top 9 and top 3 respectively. So, they're doing solidly on a couple of the things that are considered to matter most, and also on the defensive. On the rebounding side of things, I got to put one up for my guy Isaiah Stewart. He's been averaging about 20 minutes a game, and he is 2nd on the team in offensive rebounding, and is right up there at number 4 in defensive rounding, in total rebounding. He's really helped lead the charge with this team. He has been not reported. I have seen this in things that I've read. He's been called multiple times their emotional leader. He's kind of been somebody who his value transcends what you see on the box score. And I'm not surprised by that as somebody who had the fortune of getting to know who he was before he became a Piston, and see some of his locker room tendencies and just kind of his energy and fire, and how easy it was to feed off of him, whether he was active or not. So I'm very excited to see what he's been able to do with the minutes that he has gotten, and just the whole Detroit Pistons. I kind of joke sometimes that some of the players, including Isaiah, I kind of joke sometimes with the physicality and with the racking up tees and whatnot, that they are forgetting that they are not the Dumars, Lambeer, Isaiah, other Isaiah Pistons of 30 years ago. But it's a very exciting resurgence, and my hat's off to them. We thought that we were going to be seeing a winning team in February in Detroit. Just turns out we were guessing the wrong one. So I'm excited for them, and Carson, I'm excited for you. Keith says, replying to Jody Moncrief. Oh boy, I'm not seeing the message that he's replying to. I don't think so. Okay, here we go. He was talking about the earlier about the 49ers Commanders trade. Replying to Jody Moncrief, plus his 17.75 in salary, no robbery by the Commanders, maybe by the 49ers though. Keith, my brother, I appreciate you jumping in on the show. Excuse me. Um, Although I am gonna say I am gonna I mentioned earlier how I felt about the trade, so I am gonna disagree with you a little bit there. There are certain players who you're willing to give a little bit of a pinch for when it comes to money to get what they're able to provide for you on the field. And I think at his best, Deebo Samuel is one of those players. And just in this day and age, we just have to acknowledge that when it comes to certain positions, and I think wide receiver in some cases at your best is one of them. But I think it's happening more and more ubiquitously. At first, it was just QB, and now I think we're seeing it expand. I think it's going to be a little bit more on offense, though. I I still believe that the Commanders are the ones who won the trade. Maybe robbery is a little bit of a an intense and excessive term to use, but to say that it was potentially by the 49ers, I would wholeheartedly disagree with that. I don't see how getting a mid day 3 pick. Now, I will say don't sleep on getting a mid-day 3 pick. I'm not inherently saying that a fifth rounder can't make a difference for your team, because there are plenty of teams that's where teams, make things happen like Philly just made happen. And going on runs like that. That's where you separate yourself, not by what you do in the first round, but what you do in the fourth, fifth, and sixth rounds. It's. I mean, we look at. You can look at anybody and talk about winning in the trenches. Just I'll use Philly as a reference point. Jordan Mailata, undrafted. Jason Kelsey, 6th-round pick. Jason Peters was a cast off from Buffalo. The best teams and the best front offices and the best structures are the ones that are able to not only capitalize on those top picks where you've got probably 20 or 22 guys who are consensus first-round picks, but in who's able to identify what later on. So I don't necessarily think that it's a robbery either way for a fifth, and I don't think that we should rather be delegitimizing the value of a 5th-round selection. I definitely believed that Deebo Samuel was going to be traded for more than that, though. As I was saying earlier, I thought maybe a day 2 pick with a pick swap or with a conditional, something like that. I thought maybe that was more kind of what we would see, but evidently that wasn't his market. And what I had mentioned earlier, to those who hadn't seen it, what I mentioned earlier was kind of just that I thought the most likely scenario in this was that they were trying to start to make things happen on their books in preparation for getting that money out and offered it to Brock Purdy, which we've heard for a while that they're going to do. And I broke down their salary cap a little bit and their payroll a little bit, and they just have a very winding pathway to get to enough money freed up where I feel like I'd be comfortable allocating that much to Brock Purdy if I were to be at all. So my guess is that they were moving on this, thinking this is the best that we've gotten so far. Let's capitalize on this and move on to other business. That's not my understanding. That's my guess with the league year, approaching and starting in, I think it's a week and a half. That's the only thing I can really come up with, because otherwise, again, coming in from the other side with still having a week and a half to go before business opens up, I'm struggling to really see what the rush was to take a 5th-round pick, unless they really believed that, again, they wanted to move forward on other issues that they wanted to address before, or even to make that financial work for whatever they thought they were going to be paying Brock Purdy, and figured that they would do themselves no favors, at least do themselves no favors, or do themselves a disservice by potentially waiting. Maybe they thought that the markets for wide receivers in free agency, trade, the draft, or some combination of the three were going to even further deflate his value. I don't really quite see how that would happen, but maybe that was their perception. But again, I've been somebody in the last couple of years who kind of has been, I guess, cynical on the 49ers at large. I mean, I remember saying a year or two ago that I thought Kyle Shanahan would be on the hot seat because I keep waiting to hear or see this whole, offensive ingenuity and this whole offensive, Mike Shanahan type mind or Bill Walsh type mind or whoever you want to say, Andy Reid, whoever. I keep waiting to see that from him in the late playoff games, translating into wins, and again, has not been reflected as such. And until you say, or until you prove yourself on that stage, maybe not necessarily even winning the game is important, obviously, but if they had come to a point where it was clear that they were outshined for one reason or another, there are things that you could show me on a stage, and even if you're unable to win the game, I could potentially give you some grace. I have not seen that from Kyle Shanahan, but again, sometimes you see guys like Dan Quinn, who as head coaches didn't have the same results as they had as coordinators. Maybe that's the case with Shanahan. I'm not sure. Does seem like San Francisco is sticking with them come hell or high water. So that's the hill that upon which they've chosen to die. But again, not the same move I would make. I would not have. I do not believe that I have the same level of optimism when it comes to Kyle Shanahan that others do. But again, maybe they're seeing something that I'm not, or maybe on the flip side, maybe I'm putting more into certain things and putting more weight in certain things that hasn't really that other people are not. Trevor says Deebo is a name and the production hasn't been there since 2021. There was talk about releasing him. San Francisco getting a 5th-round pick and opening up an opportunity for Ricky Pearsall to play or to get playing time is huge for them. I don't inherently disagree about the Pearsall thing at all. I think that is a positive. And again, if with the financials, which it was evident that was at least a significant part of the deal, because I mentioned earlier that there was talk that Jonathan Allen was potentially going to be going in this trade at one point in one iteration of the trade that was discussed. Ultimately, he stayed in Washington, and he had a double-digit million cap number attached to him as well. But insofar as the Deebo, excuse me, insofar as the Deebo situation, if you want to call it that, another thing that I think happens sometimes, and yeah, he had pretty middling numbers this year. He had 3 touchdowns. He had 670 receiving yards. He had about a 71 grade among receivers by Pro Football Focus. So he kind of hung around the median there, at least in terms of production this season. But I think also sometimes it has to be looked at in perspective that he also is on an extremely loaded team. And I've seen this argument made with several teams like Detroit and Philly and others, that sometimes numbers get deflated just because there's more talent around him. Now, again, I don't know if inherently I would make that same argument, if I would make that same argument with Deebo Samuel necessarily. But I do think it's something that's, worth at least bringing up the question. As you said, this was, when it comes to this year, he had a significant drop back when it comes to touchdown touchdown total, but catching percentage was kind of right up there among where it's been the last few years, which was 63% this year. He's kind of hung out around that 60 to 65 mark, really the last 3 seasons. In fact, this was less than 1% point under where it was when he had that 2021 season that you're talking about, where he was an All-Pro. So I get why people are squeamish about him, but I wouldn't be surprised if he becomes more of a primary target among receivers. Because again, when he had that breakout in 2021, he had 121 targets. He's not even gotten 100 targets in each of the last 3 years. And that's, excuse me, that's despite the fact that his catching percentage hasn't really gone down at all since that season. So, maybe he's not the utility guy that he once was, where people looked at him as, this guy who can do several different things, not only in the receiving game, but otherwise. But I wouldn't be surprised if this is a bit better of a deal than some people believe it is, if they believe that he's fallen off that much since 2021. He hasn't missed a significant number of games due to injury. Again, like I say, his except for yards per reception, his numbers haven't fallen off in a way that really scares me all that much. But when you look at yards per yards per reception, I also have to look at the quarterback himself. And while Purdy's numbers the last few years have kind of been somewhat consistent, although 2023 was a little bit higher when it came to his yards per attempt. If I go back to Jimmy G, just to make sure that I have all this in front of me. So you're looking for yards per attempt for Purdy. You're looking somewhere around 8 to 9.5, which was last year. And then to go and look at Jimmy Garoppolo really quick, just to try and make this as quick as I can. Yeah. Excuse me. So he was kind of sitting in that 8.5 spot as well. So I was curious to see if maybe that was a factor in terms of his. But yeah, his average yards per completion rather, and his net yards per attempt at Garoppolo as a quarterback were also tops that year. So that may be something that you associate more with his chemistry that with Purdy than all himself, if that makes sense. So yeah, that is something to keep in mind, I think, as well, when looking at, his production since 2021. It's also linked to the fact that the quarterbacks themselves have had, kind of similar. I'm not saying there's a 100% correlation, but there definitely is some mirroring of the success that they've had. And you can say, well, that's more on Deebo, or that's more on Purdy, or that's more on, Garoppolo, or in most likelihood, it's a share of each of the three. But I am curious to see what he looks, because whichever way you want to look at him, I don't think that there's an argument that we would look at Purdy, Garoppolo, and Jaden Daniels and say he's on his way to play with the best quarterback he's played with. And in doing so, I will have raised expectations from him than I did this past season, especially insofar as the fact that the Commanders do not have an elite tight end like George Kittle. The Commanders do not have a so-called fantastic offensive mind head coach like Shanahan is supposed to be. They have a defensive head coach in Dan Quinn, which one of the biggest complete blunders that a lot of us made when it came to football the last few years was kind of devaluing too much defensive head coaches. So you have to kind of acknowledge it when you're made to look a little bit just wrong, quite frankly. That definitely has looked recently like it's not quite as correlative as we thought. But he also has somebody that I absolutely know Kurt loves in Washington, in Cliff Kingsbury, calling the shots on offense. So I am looking forward to seeing if that happens. Because also, if that happens, if he's able to come back with a significantly better production with a second-year Jaden Daniels and under the tutelage of Cliff Kingsbury, that also, in my opinion, would be a scathing indictment against Kyle Shanahan. There are so many people who think negatively of Cliff Kingsbury and his offense, but seem to work pretty well with Jaden Daniels this past season. And if it does any significant sort of rebound of production for Deebo Samuel, that may have people not only looking at Samuel and Daniels and Kingsbury, might have some eyes looking back over at what's going on over there in that San Francisco situation, because somehow I feel like there's always certain either coaches or players in sports who either are able to sort of stay out of the light of criticism or have it shone more brightly on them than the average. And I think that someone like Kyle Shanahan has been the former. I think that people love him because, again, obviously he was a solid coordinator. He is obviously of the Shanahan, not only the Shanahan coaching tree, but the Shanahan family tree. Under Mike Shanahan, who was one of the the top offensive coaches of the last couple decades. He's but I'm not quite sure that if he's not able to win a Super Bowl now when he's locked up Brock Purdy, you're not going to suddenly be able to add more to your team when you lock $60 to $70 million into a quarterback. You're going to have to really nail the draft picks that you make, and specifically the lower ones, not the ones that are first and second year that are going to get the fifth year option. Expect the bag, as they say. Pulling off of that, we are just ticked past the buzzer. Guys, we had a lot of interaction tonight. Can't thank you enough. And thank you in particular to the guys who came on after waiting for me to fix that technical issue in the beginning. Glad we got that all taken care of. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to next week. We are getting closer and closer to opening day for Major League Baseball. That's really exciting to me. We are getting that's going to be the last show I think that we have before the league year opens. So I expect there to be a lot more football to talk about a week from now. But in the meantime, I want y'all to have a great week. Happy first day of March. We're getting closer to spring. Those nights days rather, are getting ever so slightly longer and longer each day. So wishing y'all a great week ahead. Be back next week. Same